There are two main ways that most people who aim to train in the reinforcement-based way go about their training. You've got luring and shaping. Honorable mention to capturing as well, but I do feel like that falls a lot more into the shaping realm of things. But today we're just going to focus on luring and shaping. What they are, what they're not, how I go about luring and shaping, and which one I prefer, because there is one that I much prefer. It's shaping. This isn't one of those videos where you have to like watch to the end to find out which one I like more. No, I much prefer shaping. Now, I'm not saying that I'm never going to lure again, that you're never going to catch me luring. It's just that I aim to use shaping as much as I possibly can in my training over luring. I am going to explain why. But first, I wanted to talk a little bit about my luring and shaping journey and how I became educated on both luring and shaping. So when I first started training animals, I actually began training with horses. I had a pet dog at home, but I don't know why I didn't think to train a pet dog at home. You know, she knew the basics of like sit down, stay, that sort of thing. But I was a horse girl through and through, still am, certified horse girl. Can't help it. And I was really into the training side of horses, mainly because I couldn't afford the actual riding lessons. So I would do a lot of groundwork with a lot of horses. And the yard I was on had a lot of horses coming in and being trained, a lot of green horses or untouched horses and things like that. And you realise very quickly with horses, that luring is a lot more dangerous than just like luring a dog. Now, I had lured my dog at home. Like, Bo was queen of being lured into a sit or a down. But with horses, they're a lot bigger and they get very excited, especially the young ones or the like previously unhandled ones. And so you put a piece of food near their mouth and you're like running along with them, they're gonna like jump, buck, bronk, and have fun with it like that. But when you're 5'2", and God knows how small I was then, you're put in a position of danger, and it's just, you don't really want that out of a horse. You don't want to rehearse that undesired behaviour out of a horse. I was speaking to a mentor about this when I was a teenager and saying, like, how do you get horses? I don't understand how you get horses to do these things without forcing them, because in the equestrian community, it's very normal to force a horse into doing something. And she gave me a book by a woman called Shauna Karash, I think. That's not how you pronounce it, but I tried my best. And the name of the book is You Can Teach Your Horse to Do Anything with Clicker Training. Now, you might be sitting there thinking, why do I care about training horses? We're training dogs. Can we just get to it? But I promise you that this all connects. Because this book actually doesn't begin with telling you how to clicker train your horse. It begins with telling you how to clicker train sea animals. And I was reading the book thinking, why do I need to learn how this woman clicker trained sea mammals? I haven't got a dolphin. I'm not interested. But the truth is, what it was teaching you as the reader, if sea animals can be taught to do these tricks or be taught to take medication or have injections through clicker training, then who knows what we can teach our pet animals to do. So if we can train those animals through clicker training, the potential of what we can do with our dogs is amazing. And when I say clicker training, I really am meaning using the clicker training through shaping. And that kind of moves us on to what is luring and shaping. Let's look at luring first. Luring is essentially putting a piece of food or a desired object in front of the animal's mouth and then leading them around into the desired position with that piece of food. Shaping, however, is the rewarding of the gradual progression towards your desired behaviour. So, for example, if you wanted your dog to be able to sit on a target on the floor, you would first reward them if they sat next to the target. And as they got closer and closer, you would keep rewarding, and then you would finally get to them sitting on that target on the floor. During shaping, the reward comes after the desired action or behaviour, or as close to that as you're getting, because you're working in approximations to your desired behaviour. And with luring, the reward is always present. So the dog knows exactly the reward they're getting all the time because it's right in front of their nose. I personally think there are pros and cons to both of these sorts of training. I would like to go through a few of them with you, beginning with some of the pros of luring. I think the biggest pro of luring is that it gets the job done first time. If you want your dog to sit, most dogs are going to sit down if you are moving your hand above their head and they go, oh, go back, and suddenly they're sat down. You need something that's quick and I just need you to sit right now. Luring gets that done. Luring is also easy access for humans. With luring, there isn't much learning that you have to do. You don't have to learn about like reward systems. You don't really need to learn about how to use a clicker if you don't want to. You are just moving the dog into position. The learning on the human part is not, I don't want to say lower, but it's less. You don't have to do as much learning. And so it's very, very easy access. You don't have to watch videos like this to figure out the difference between them and which one you prefer. You can just go ahead and get started with the training. There also isn't really much learning time for dogs, in the sense that, okay, maybe if you are seeking to teach duration or distractions, then possibly, yeah, you can definitely have learning time with that. But if you are happy to lure the dog into position every single time you're asking for that behavior, then the time for working is minimal, because all I have to do is pop the food item above the dog's head or lure them around to where I need them, and it's done. So learning time, especially for the dog, very, very minimal. And of course, as long as you have something the dog wants, you'll be able to get the desired behavior for the most part, especially in close contact. Now, this probably isn't the case for high distances or high distractions, but if the dog's close to you and you just need them to do something and you have a food item or an item they want, they're probably going to do it. But this leads us to our number one con of luring, which is if you don't have that high value item, well, dog says, screw you, why should I listen? The dog's kind of learning, I maybe don't need to do something if they don't have what I want them to have. For me, it kind of encourages the idea that you are your dog's entertainer, you are the court jester, and as long as you're non-entertaining for your dog is non-listening. I also think luring discourages the dog to figure things out. I would like a dog who's a bit of a free thinker, if you will, who wants to try different things and ask different questions. And I think that luring stumps any of that inquisitive energy, which is what I seek when I'm working with a dog. Now, this one's quite a big one, and I think maybe a bit of a controversial one, which isn't really my vibe, but I want to say it anyway. I think luring can lead to a luring correct mindset. Now, I'm not someone who wants corrections within my training. And I'm not saying just because you lure, that means you're going to add corrections into your training. What I am saying is, if you don't have that next best thing, if you don't have the bigger piece of chicken, if you don't have the yummier piece of steak or their favorite ball instead of the ball they don't really like that much, what do you have left other than a correction, other than like a lead pop or a no, don't do that? I'm not by any means saying that if you lure, then you must correct your dog. Absolutely not. I am saying for some people, it could lead them down that route because the frustration is high. Because, okay, why do I have to be carrying around the next best thing for you all the time? Why do I have to be your entertainer all the time? Why can't you just listen to me? That is the energy that luring can bring, especially in highly frustrating scenarios. Another huge con of luring is that if you're working with an already frightened dog and you try and lure them with food, a couple of things can happen. Number one, the dog doesn't actually become less frightened because the food isn't of higher value than them being frightened. Number two, it then poisons the food. Whenever you have a treat in your hand, they're thinking, oh my God, they're gonna make me do something I don't wanna do. We don't want that. You always want food to be fun and because of something good. And when you're working with luring, you're asking for the final behavior straight away, and that can put a lot of pressure on an already frightened dog. Or you have the other end of the spectrum where you have a dog that becomes so obsessed with your hand because you've always got food in your hands that no matter where you move your hand, the dog moves with you. Now, this can be a huge issue when you want to train distance cues or you want the dog to move in opposition to you. So you're running one way and you want your dog to go the other way. That can be a huge issue because the dog is so you obsessed rather than shaped by their environment or their targets. Finally, with luring, the reward is always present. So the dog knows exactly what's in your hand before you have even asked them to complete the behavior. This can make asking that question less desirable because I know what's coming. I know that treat's there, and actually I'm not really in the mood right now. I don't really want that piece of chicken, so I'm just not going to do that behavior. Thank you very much. You can ask someone else, or, you know, I'm sure there's a border collie somewhere who would do it for you. It makes that reward less rewarding because it's always there and they know it's always going to be there. And so it's like, And that's when you get into the issue of I need a bigger reward and a bigger reward and a bigger reward. Now, to make it all fair, we are going to discuss some of the cons of shaping, of which there are a handful. I think the number one con of shaping for me is that it can stress out an already stressed out dog, especially if you don't know what you're doing, or the question you're asking them is too big, or the criteria is confusing. An already highly over-aroused dog or shut down dog can become more stressed through shaping because you are asking more of them than just following a piece of food, because you are asking them to make action steps. With an over-aroused dog, you've then got a dog who's launching themselves at you, who's running around not listening to you, who is trying every single trick in the book just to get a treat off of you. And with an overly shut down dog, you've got a dog hiding from you, you've got a dog who doesn't want to interact with you because they are so stressed that they can't. Now, luring wouldn't help with that either. That is a whole separate topic of building confidence in a dog, which I'm happy to do a video on. If you want that, let me know. But yeah, with highly stressed out dogs, it has the potential to increase stress, especially at the start, either start for you and your learning, or the start for them and their learning. And speaking of starts, shaping has a very, very slow start. For a dog who's never tried shaping before, and a handler that's never tried shaping before, it's going to be slow. It's going to be slow, and it's probably going to be boring, and it's going to be a little bit frustrating because the dog is so used to just being told exactly what to do rather than exploring what answers could possibly be. If you're used to having the behavior done straight away, shaping can feel incredibly slow. And that can directly relate to handler error. Shaping shows your handler error. I've often described it like looking at holes in an old tapestry. Like, you know, you can do this thing and this thing and this thing, but it's wholly here, and they get distracted in this environment, and they can't do it unless I'm standing in a certain way, and they don't know how to do it on different sorts of flooring, and they can't do it quickly like I want them to. They can't do it with the accuracy I want them to. It shows up all these little, tiny little things that you're doing, and it can kind of make you feel a bit shitty. It can make you feel like, holy crap, I thought my dog and I had all of these basic behaviors down, and we actually don't. Because if I'm not standing in a certain way or doing a certain thing, my dog doesn't understand it. So have they ever really learnt it? And this is where the conversation around prompting comes in, because I have been awful at this. Keeping my hand in my pocket while I'm training, because that's the pocket food's in, and the dog realizing, actually, I only want to do things when that hand is in that pocket. I have had to work on where my hands are, where I'm looking. And I've also had to work on not working with food on me, having the food elsewhere and going to get that reward for them. Especially with dogs that have like been lured a lot with food. They're usually very grabby and jumpy because they know food is on you somewhere. So working on that for me has been incredibly difficult. Now going on to my favorite part, which is the pros of shaping. My favorite pro of shaping is that I think it promotes a full understanding of what you are asking of your dog. I think if your dog can only follow a cue under certain circumstances, when the moon's in Virgo, does the moon get in Virgo? I don't know. When only a certain person is asking them, when they're inside on a certain texture of flooring, when you're this close to them, or they can only sit if it takes them 300 seconds actually. Yeah, okay, I'll sit down then, fine. All of those things. I think shaping works on those aspects of dog training, because I genuinely believe that if your dog can't do those things, you have to question whether they truly understand the cue, or do they only understand it in this picture of time. I also think that once you have a dog that has the basics of shaping down, where you can just put any sort of target on the floor or bring them into a scenario and they're like, oh, okay, training time, do that whole I'm going to try more thing. And then you've got a more engaged dog, because whenever you go into a training scenario, they're not waiting for the next best thing. They're not waiting for food. They're waiting to try something. What's the game today? What fun are we having today? What do I need to figure out today? And finally, one of my favorite things about shaping is that it's not a one and done thing like luring can be. For example, in luring a sit, I would just move the piece of food above the dog's head. Congratulations, you did the thing, you get the food item. But with shaping, we are breaking it down into small steps and incrementally getting what we're asking for. I think this just makes training sessions so much more fun. So much more fun. Because I'm not, well, they sat because they got the piece of food. And so training's kind of like, what do we do now? What do we do now? We could get them to sit again, I mean, on something else maybe? Or I just think shaping gives you more fun time with your dog. So now you've listened to me sit here and harp on about shaping and why I like it so much, I'm going to tell you the how. How do we even begin with shaping? What you need to do to start shaping. One of the most frequent questions I get asked is, but you train with reinforcement-based training or positive-based training, and you're asking your dog these questions during shaping, but you don't say no to your dog. So how do they know they've got it wrong? If you're not saying no, if you're not correcting your dog when they've done the wrong thing, how could they possibly ever figure out what you're asking of them? Now, this is broken down into a few steps, which I'm going to call our mechanics, which is about us. So this isn't about the dog necessarily. This is about us and how we move through the shaping process. So if you're not saying no to your dog and I'm not saying no to the dog, and the dog is just trying all these different things, how can they possibly know when they've done the right thing? I always ask myself the same question. If I wanted to give my dog a yes right now, if I wanted to give my dog a click that they've done the right thing, what question would I ask them? What is the smallest question I could ask my dog for them to get a yes out of me? This is setting your dog up for success. At the start of any session, but especially when we're working with dogs who haven't done a lot of shaping before, we want to give them a win. We want to start with the smallest question. Remember, when we're shaping, it is the gradual progression to the desired behavior. We do not want it perfectly done the first time. It can be, for sure. Like, that could happen, but that's not what we're after. We want to ask the smallest question possible to get to what we want. And then we'll keep adding questions onto that the closer they get to that desired behavior. If I wanted to ask a dog a very, very small question of teaching a downstay without luring and without baiting, so putting a food item in an area I want them to downstay, what would I do? I would look at where the dog has had success downstaying before. Now, the first thing that comes to my mind is their bed. A blanket, a settle mat, the sofa, they have downstayed on those places before because they're asleep on them, because they go to relax in them. So for me, I would probably find bed or a blanket. I'd probably use a blanket, and I would make that blanket huge. I would lay it out to its biggest size, and I would stand by the blanket. And your dog's probably thinking, blanket, I've laid on that before, I know that one. And so they would come over and lay down on the blanket. I would probably also be sitting down, because that encourages your dog to get down with you. All you need to begin shaping is that first reward, is that first yes. Then you can make it more and more difficult. So when I first begin shaping just about any behavior, I will use a clicker. When we begin using the clicker in shaping, what we're looking at is the behavior we want, or as close to that behavior as we can get. The click and the reward. So your click is your bridge. That is the thing that tells your dog food is coming, reward is coming. So you have desired behavior or start of desired behavior. You have your click, and then you have your reward. That space between click and reward, you've got 3 seconds. After that, your dog has moved on. Their brain has gone elsewhere. The science shows that's the amount of time you've got between click and reward to get it right. However, the time between desired behavior and click can be a little while. The next thing you need to make sure you're doing before you even begin the training is decide on your criteria. When I ask my dog this question in its final form, what do I want it to look like? Am I okay with a sloppy sit where they're sort of off to the side? Am I okay with them moving their front end down to go into a down, or do I want their back end to pop down? Am I okay with them whining every single time I ask them for a downstay? You need to decide your criteria and make sure you know what you are rewarding. If your dog is able to do all of these things, how do we generalize the behavior? How do we get it so our dog is able to do this no matter what? You're going to work on minimizing or removing your targets. So for example, asking them on a big blanket, you're then going to make the blanket smaller and smaller and smaller until they can do it without a blanket. Then you're also going to work on speed, duration, distance, distraction, interruptions, and accuracy. Can your dog do it at a distance from you? Can your dog do it if you are doing star jumps? Can your dog do it if you're running in the opposite direction? Can your dog do it in the middle of doing another behavior? But what do you do if your dog can't do what you're asking of them? If your dog can't do that downstay that you're asking of them, you make the question smaller. Your dog doesn't get it. Your dog is not being stubborn, just they simply do not understand what's being asked of them, or they're too over-aroused. Essentially, you need to make it a bit easier for your dog again and keep repeating that easier version of the final task. Next thing you can do if your dog just isn't getting it is look at the environment that you're asking them in. If you take your dog outside to a busy park and ask them for this downstay for the first time, and they have never done a duration downstay or downstay on different sorts of textured flooring or downstay around children, is that really fair? And then the weight of that cue and what that really means loses its power a bit. We don't want to be doing that. We do not want to be repeating when the dog's not able to do it. Change your environment. So we need to ask an easier question, and we need to look at our environment, change distractions, maybe work in a smaller space in the house. Think about, where will my dog succeed? Where can they get this that I can reward them and give them a win? And then they might be able to understand what I'm asking of them with a bit more clarity. And that leads us directly onto my next point, which is check your clarity. If you are changing up the criteria a bit too quickly right at the start of your training, your dog is probably going to get pretty confused. What am I doing that is prompting my dog into the behaviours that could confuse them in the long run? When your dog gets good at the behaviour, that's when we can start adding the interruptions and the distractions and the movements and the change. Now we've just got to look at a couple of things we do and don't want to do. Number one, baiting. Now, some people are going to say you just need to get the behaviour started, you just need to get the dog moving into the position you want. So lure them into the position you want. Pop a piece of food down on that target. Just lead them onto the bed if you want to teach them a place cue. Now, I'm not going to say I'm never going to do this, but I would prefer not to. I don't want the dog to get confused about what the reward is for, especially if I'm starting on something like a big blanket on the floor, because I want the behaviour to become more and more specified and specific. I don't want them to think the blanket is the reward, because to get them on the blanket in the first place, I rewarded the blanket by putting a treat down on the blanket or luring them towards the blanket. Now, something you do want to do is reward for halfway steps. For example, teaching your dog a spin. You could use a target, so a target trainer, to teach your dog to spin around. You might get to the point where you can say spin to your dog and they'll halfway spin. In that moment, I don't want you to be going, no, now spin. No, a full spin. No, that's only half a spin. I'm sorry, you're not getting a reward for that. I want you to encourage the almost behaviours. And the next thing that you can do to help move to get you to the final desired behaviour is where you place your food reward. If they get a half spin and you want them to do the full spin, can you place the food reward at the end of that half spin? And this kind of leads us on to talking about, when do you even give them that cue? Because we're not actually cueing at the start of the shaping. We are just shaping them. We are saying, click, yes, you got that right, have a food reward or a reward item. Different people are going to say different things on this. I do add my cues in quite early. A lot of people say you need the final behaviour before you even think about adding in a cue. I don't do that. I'll be honest, I don't always do that. I think if the dog is very, very, very almost there, like they're doing it maybe 8 times out of 10, I'm going to add the cue in. If they're doing it any less than that, I probably wouldn't, because what you don't want to do is for the dog to be confused about what that cue means. If you're, for example, teaching a place, like on a bed or a settle mat, and you are saying place from the very, very beginning, then the dog is not holding duration on that place. The dog could then learn that place doesn't actually mean hold duration. Place means hopping on and off of this blanket on the floor. And the final thing you do definitely want to be doing is taking breaks. Your actual training time of training that trick, of shaping that behaviour, should be very, very minimal. With a puppy, I'm talking seconds, like 10, 20 seconds of trying it, and then you're going to have a break. With an adult dog who has done shaping before, it could be, I don't know, up to 3 minutes of learning that shaping skill, but you definitely want to be taking a break. Active learning time and break time all comes under training. Way number one is by playing with toys. I try not to use toys that we're throwing away from me, because I don't want the reward to be over there somewhere. The reward is me. With me, we're doing this thing together. We're working together. This is not you time or me time. This is us time. So yeah, I will use tuggy toys and things like that, with the caveat that the dog needs to have a good out cue and be able to calm back down after using these tuggy toys. I do not want a training session to then turn into tug of war, because the dog doesn't want to give the toy up and tries to go and like run off with it. But most of the time what I'm doing is popcorning food. So I'm giving my search cue, which means you're released from whatever you're doing, off you go. Go and find that piece of food I've just thrown out. go and look for it, go and have a sniff. Dogs, 99.999% of the time, are going to come straight back to you anyway, and you can do that a couple of times. I think that's everything. We could discuss so much more. I could talk about release cues and why that's really important in shaping and how that helps with duration. I could talk about setups for distractions. I could talk about how to gain speed out of your dog. This is already long enough. If you do want more like that and you want more information and deep dives into topics like this, as well as training tips and a look into how I train dogs, I am starting a Patreon. So if you want to join a community of other like-minded dog people, I will leave the information for that in the description for this video. I just want to say thank you for watching. It's been a long one. It has gotten progressively dark through all of this. I will say in my defense, it's 3 p.m. Anyway, thank you for watching. I hope you gained something from this, and I hope to see you next time.